What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Again. Russia is like a casino run by a paranoid old boss who refuses to ever leave the table. You know the type. Had one too many drinks, chain smoking, tips waitresses with poker chips every time they bring him another beer, and looks like he has been playing for at least 48 hours straight. But let's transport from Las Vegas to the inside of the Kremlin. Everyone around this big old boss once believed they had a chance to become the next big player, Putin's heir, his chosen successor, his political padawan. And yet, one by one, those supposed crown princes are dragged off the stage, stripped of power, and exiled to irrelevance. Whether it is Andrey Turchak shipped off to a godforsaken outpost, Nikolai Patrushev humiliated into a desk job about shipbuilding, or even Alexei Dyumin reduced to glorified driver with a secretary, the pattern repeats itself every single time. Anyone too close to the throne gets turned into a nobody. The question is why? Because in a personalist dictatorship, the idea of a successor is not a plan, it is a death sentence. In Putin's Russia, you do not want to be seen as a potential next president. This puts you right in Putin's crosshairs, and when he pulls the trigger, he almost never misses. So today, let's dive into how the Kremlin grooms, chews up, and then spits out its supposed heirs. From the meteoric rise and brutal exile of Turchak, to the creepy public delusions of Patrushev, to the clownish survival tactics of Medvedev. Every character reminds us that Putin's Russia cannot tolerate a future without Putin. And the only way to keep things to Putin's liking is to simply destroy entire country's future. And that is what he did. Let's start with Andrei Turchak, the man who was once sold as Putin's ultimate successor, only to be dumped into political Siberia. His rise was textbook dynastic privilege, son of a loyal crony, gifted positions before his 30th birthday, and suddenly elevated from a backwater governor to the ruling party's administrative muscle. For a decade, he looked like the real deal, checking every box of Kremlin-approved succession training, like literally almost everyone. You're gonna see it right now. Senator? Check. Governor? Check. Party boss? Check. Federal Security Deputy? Check, you guessed it. At 42, he had more titles than most Romanov heirs. Criminologists salivated over his prospects, newspapers whispered the chosen one, and every act of his life screamed preparation for the throne. But then came October 2024, when the so-called prince was banished to the Altai Republic. Let's be clear, this was not just exile, this was humiliation for him. Altai is the place with a GDP ranking of 83 out of 85, a budget smaller than the cash stash of one corrupt Moscow policeman, and a capital that barely counts as a city. Governing Altai is like being handed the keys to a rusted-out Lada and told that this is your promotion car. Turchak, who was entered the infamous Russia is here forever meme just before retreat from Kherson, now presides over a place where even corruption cannot buy you a palace. I mean, there's simply none palaces there. He can fire his whole local government in a tantrum, but no one in Moscow will ever blink. He has gone from the heir removed from Putin's wheel, shrunk to background noise in less than a year. Have any of you even heard about Turchak? Well, that is the thing. And that is the point, because in Putin's world, successors are not crowned, they are destroyed. While Turchak might not sound familiar to most of you, Patrushev is a more household name. He was the one truly seen as the next Putin even by the Western media. What happened to him? Where is he right now? Let's talk about him in our next chapter. Then comes the saga of Nikolai Patrushev, the man who spent years being portrayed as Putin's shadow monarch. For 16 long years, he clung to the Secretary of the Security Council post, a position with not so much real power, no budget, no army, just a glorified meeting organizer role. Yet, Patrushev used that empty platform to flood state media with his wild conspiracies. America wants to starve Russians. Ukraine is a Nazi lab experiment. Global elitists are plotting to enslave the Slavic soul. Western journalists, mistaking noise for influence, painted him as the Rasputin of modern Russia. The myth was convenient, but the Kremlin did not buy it forever. In May 2024, Putin stripped him of even that ceremonial dignity and tossed him into the most humiliating of roles: presidential aide on shipbuilding. A man who built his life in the KGB is now expected to chat about sterns and hulls. This is not just demotion, it's just public mockery. But the Patrushev dynasty was not spared humiliation with the father alone. Dmitry Patrushev, groomed since youth in cushy bank positions and then parachuted into the Ministry of Agriculture, looked very sad to inherit the Kremlin's favor. He collected medals like a child hoarding toys, from honored agricultural worker, almost never even working any single day in the field, in the farm, to then even Chechen-issued diplomas. Chechen-issued diplomas. For a while, rumors swirled that he might be the real heir, especially after Putin publicly joked on live TV about his eggs when egg prices skyrocketed. And I know that joke does not make sense much in English, because eggs in Russian is also referred to the men's testicles. So, yeah, still not funny, but you at least get the idea. Anyways, by 2023-24, Patrushev's trajectory flattened into farce. Promoted in name only to Deputy Prime Minister for Agri-Industry and Ecology, his actual power shrank. His ministry kept the budget, while he inherited paperwork and cattle epidemics. A prince without a kingdom. Both Patrushevs, father and son, became perfect illustrations on how the Kremlin nurtures myths of succession, only to crush them once they threaten to look real. But wait, there is more. There is a man that has been the closest to Putin physically and metaphorically: Alexei Dyumin. In terms of popularity, he is somewhere in between Turchak and Patrushev. Let's talk about him in our next chapter. Alexei Dyumin is another name whispered for years as Putin's potential replacement, and his legend reads like a cheap fan fiction. Bodyguard-turned-general, goalie in Putin's Night Hockey League, Russian-style NHL. Is savior from drowning, bear strangler, Crimea annexation expert and escort, Yanukovych evacuation hero, you name it. Dyumin allegedly did it all. The stories are so ridiculous they might as well include slaying dragons or catching bullets with his teeth. He cultivated the image of loyal squire, the myth of absolute devotion, and for a while the regime rewarded him. Deputy Defense Minister, then Governor of Tula, then Presidential Aide, Security Council member, and finally Secretary of the State Council. Sounds powerful, right? Kinda wrong. Every title came with no real budget, no army to command, and no levers to actually control, just a desk, a secretary, and a driver. By 2024, Dyumin's rise conveniently coincided with Turchak's exile and Patrushev Jr.'s demotion. It was like Putin was rearranging his deck of would-be heirs, only to put them all in dead-end pile. Dyumin, once the golden retriever of the Kremlin, was effectively neutered. The State Council, which some claim to be Putin's retirement playground, is nothing but a dormant advisory body. No money to steal, no power to wield, nothing. Imagine telling a man who supposedly saved your life from a bear, allegedly, obviously, and that now his new task is to just shuffle papers on an advisory office with no real influence. And the paper's contents are like the density of toilet paper in the Kremlin, how many pinches of salt to add to school lunches, or the size of numbers and letters on city buses. Something like this. This is what happens to these so-called successors in Russia. They get hollow titles, but the Kremlin makes sure they cannot even command their own stuff. Because even if they want to take a car to go grab some lunch, they need a written approval from another, similar discarded successor. This is exactly how Russian bureaucracy machine creates employment, quote-unquote, for these Putin wannabes. Which, if you ask me, is still way better than a quick, mind-blowing date with an open window in a high-rise building. Before the Dyumins and the Turchaks, there was Sergei Ivanov, the almost successor of 2007. Back then, the Kremlin staged a grotesque talent show, Ivanov versus Medvedev. Both were made first deputy prime ministers, and the one who shined brightest would win the presidential elections. For a while, Ivanov seemed to be on equal footing with Medvedev. He was everywhere, campaigning, speaking, appearing more than Putin himself at some times. People seriously believed that he had a shot, but by the late 2007 the curtain finally fell, Medvedev was chosen and Ivanov was discarded. Overnight, literally, his career plummeted from the heights of power to empty ceremonial roles. By 2016, Ivanov was reduced to special envoy for ecology, transport and environmental activities. A title so absurd it might as well be keeper of Putin's goldfish, I guess. His main task? Just protecting Amur leopards. Imagine once being a top contender for the presidency of Russia and then ending your career handing out pamphlets on wildlife conservation. I'm not saying it's not important, but you get the idea. And yet this is where the fate waits near every successor in Russia. Irrelevance disguised as duty. Ivanov has been out of sight for so long that anyone born after 2000 barely even knows his name. Even his name is probably the most common combination of Russian first and last name, Sergei Ivanov. If there is a Russian mafia boss in an American movie, his name is going to be either Sergei Ivanov or Alexei Romanov. So even when people try to Google him to read about his life and achievements, Wikipedia offers you like 300 different pages all about different Sergei Ivanovs. And so today he is the ghost of succession past, a reminder of how dangerous it is to even dream of inheriting the Kremlin throne. So, what's the moral of this grotesque parade of would-be heirs? In a personalist autocracy like Putin's, succession is not preparation, it is poison. The moment you look like a replacement, you become a threat. And threats must be neutralized, whether by exile to powerless provinces, humiliation with meaningless titles, or ridicule in the eyes of the public, at best. Turchak governs in wasteland. Patrushev Sr. builds ships he has never seen. Patrushev Jr. drowns in paperwork. Dyumin commands nobody. Ivanov protects leopards. And Medvedev, well, Medvedev just survives only by turning himself into a clown begging not to be poisoned. That, by the way, hopefully answers some of you guys' questions why Medvedev behaves like a child. He himself plunged himself into obscurity, so Putin no longer sees him as threat to rule. I mean, who would let the presidency do such a joke, right? And by the way, could be this an elaborate scheme of Medvedev to rise later like a phoenix, so let's see. Well, we shall see. But just in general, the system cannot allow the concept of a successor to exist, because if Putin is replaceable, then why not replace him right now? That thought alone is a treason in a regime built on the myth of eternal rule, which is why, as Putin's age becomes impossible to ignore, Russia stares into a terrifying vacuum. There are no heirs waiting behind the scenes, no graceful transition plans, just a fragile autocracy that will one day lose its irreplaceable man. And when that day comes, the country will discover that destroying every successor was not clever politics. It was self-destruction, disguised as control. Chaos will erupt with everyone, including criminal and military organizations fighting for power, because the only way to seize control in such scenario is through force. Well, there you have it, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to support our work, there are links down below, for example, Patreon memberships. It's the best way to support what we do here on YouTube. The link is down below. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
To sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.